The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a day already gray with the threat of rain and the heavier weight of overdue bills. It was made of thick, cream-colored paper that felt alien in Elara Vance's small, cluttered apartment, a place where everything was worn thin by time and necessity. The ink was a faded black, the script elegant and archaic, and it informed her that she, a 34-year-old single mother working double shifts as a hospital orderly, was the sole heir to the estate of Aethel Vance, her great-aunt, a woman whose name she had never once heard spoken. The estate consisted of a single property, the long-defunct and infamous Vance Son Perfumery, sealed by court order for 50 years. The final sentence of the lawyer's dry, formal notice was underlined twice, a stark command in the otherwise placid text. It was a quote from Aethel's will, a final, cryptic instruction that felt less like a bequest and more like a warning. It read, "The scent is a lie. The value is not in the bottle." That single sentence would unspool the rest of her life. If you feel that pull of a story just beginning, that sense that you're on the edge of a deep and hidden truth, then go ahead and subscribe to this channel for more narratives that explore the legacies we never knew we had. And let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from as we join Elara on this journey. The paper trembled in Elara's hand, the sharp edges a strange contrast to the soft, worn fabric of the armchair she had collapsed into. Outside, the city sighed, a constant hum of traffic and distant sirens that was the soundtrack to her life. Here, inside, the air was thick with the scent of lavender-scented cleaner and the faint, medicinal smell that clung to her scrubs. Her son, 8-year-old Leo, was asleep in the next room, his breathing a quiet, steady rhythm that was the only real peace she ever knew. In the small bedroom at the end of the hall, her mother, Evelyn, was lost in the fog of her own mind, a place where memories surfaced like disjointed islands in a vast, gray sea. The inheritance felt like a mistake, a clerical error that would soon be corrected by another, more sensible letter. Perfumery. The word itself sounded like a joke, a relic from a world of silk gloves and pearl necklaces that had nothing to do with her reality of lukewarm coffee and aching feet. The factory was a local legend, a hulking brick carcass on the industrial outskirts of the city. People called it the poison garden. They said the ground was saturated with chemicals, that the air around it was heavy with the ghosts of forgotten flowers, and that the whole place was a toxic monument to a family's spectacular failure. A burden. That's what this was. Another weight to add to the pile already pressing down on her shoulders. She imagined legal fees, demolition costs, environmental cleanup fines that would drown her before she could even take a breath. She would sell it. That was the only logical choice. Sell the land for whatever she could get, pay off her debts, and maybe, just maybe, find a small apartment where her mother could have a window that looked out onto something other than a brick wall. The decision brought no relief, only a strange, hollow ache. The warning echoed in her mind. The scent is a lie. It was nonsense. The rambling of a wealthy, eccentric old woman she'd never met. The next day, she took 2 buses to a part of downtown she rarely visited, where the buildings were made of granite and glass and the silence in the hallways felt expensive. The law office of Alistair Finch was on the 32nd floor, a wood-paneled sanctuary that smelled of old leather and lemon polish. Mr. Finch himself seemed carved from the same era as the furniture. He was ancient, his skin as thin and translucent as parchment, his eyes a pale, watery blue that seemed to look straight through her. He didn't rise when she entered, merely gestured to the chair opposite his colossal desk. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice a dry rustle of paper. "Thank you for coming." He spoke of the will, of the 50-year seal mandated by the courts after a bitter and protracted legal battle over proprietary formulas. He mentioned a rival corporation, a name that meant nothing to her, Origin, and how they had tried to claim Aethel Vance's work as their own. The court had sealed the factory to preserve the intellectual property until the dispute could be settled, but it never was. Aethel had simply walked away, leaving her life's work to time and rust. She was a singular woman, Mr. Finch said, peering at Elara over the top of his spectacles. She believed that some things were not meant to be owned, only protected. He slid a small, heavy object across the polished expanse of the desk. It was a single key, made of ornate, blackened iron, the head shaped like a blooming rose. This is for the main gate. It is the only key. He folded his hands, his knuckles large and swollen with age. The letter you received contained a line from her will. Piece of advice. I feel it is my duty to repeat it to you now. Your great-aunt was adamant on this point. She said, "The scent is a lie. The value is not in the bottle." He paused, letting the words hang in the still air. She also told me to tell her heir something else, should the day ever come. She said, "Some legacies are prisons, child. Be sure you are the warden, not the inmate." Elara stared at the key. It felt cold and heavy in her palm, a solid piece of a past she didn't know she had. Prison. The word resonated with the feeling of dread that had been coiling in her stomach. This wasn't a gift. It was a test, a puzzle she didn't have the time or energy to solve. That Saturday, she stood before the factory. The iron gates were even taller than she'd imagined, a filigree of rusted roses and thorns that seemed to guard not a building, but a forgotten kingdom. A faded, peeling sign hung crookedly from one of the pillars. Vance Son Perfumery.
1888.
Beyond the gates, a jungle of weeds and wildflowers had reclaimed the cobblestone drive. The factory itself was a monstrous silhouette against the bruised purple of the twilight sky, its brick facade stained dark with age, its windows like 1,000 vacant eyes. The air did have a smell, but it wasn't toxic. It was complex, a faint and layered scent of damp earth, rain-soaked stone, and something else, something sweet and wild, like crushed petals and ozone after a lightning strike. It was a lonely smell, a smell of abandonment. She lifted the key, its weight a strange comfort in the face of such daunting decay. The lock was stiff, groaning in protest as she turned the key with both hands. With a final, shuddering click, it gave way. The gate swung inward on a long, mournful screech of metal, opening a path into the past. Elara hesitated, her hand still on the cold iron. She thought of Leo, of her mother, of the mountain of bills on her kitchen table. This place was a problem to be solved, a property to be liquidated. Nothing more. But as she stood on the threshold, the strange, wild scent pulling her forward, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not just opening a gate, but stepping into the first line of a story that had been waiting 50 years to be read. The silence inside the gates was a physical presence, a thick, insulating blanket that muffled the distant hum of the city. The overgrown grounds were a chaotic tapestry of nature's patient reclamation. Wild roses, their thorns like tiny daggers, coiled around the rusted lampposts. Queen Anne's lace and chicory grew in defiant bursts of white and blue from cracks in the cobblestones. It wasn't just neglect. It was a collaboration between industry and wilderness, creating a space that felt both ruined and sacred. Elara had brought Leo with her, a last-minute decision born of a desire not to be alone in this daunting place. He held her hand tightly, his eyes wide not with fear, but with a child's pure, undiluted wonder. "It's like a castle for sleeping giants," he whispered, his voice a small, reverent sound in the vast quiet. The main building loomed before them, its grand arched entrance framed by stone carvings of intertwined vines and flowers, a testament to a time when even factories were built with a sense of artistry. The heavy oak doors were unlocked. Elara pushed one open, and it swung inward with a low, resonant groan, releasing a puff of cool, still air that carried the scent she had noticed outside, but stronger now, more defined. It was the smell of dust and time, yes, but beneath that was a complex bouquet. The dry, papery scent of dried herbs, the faint, resinous tang of wood, the sharp, clean note of glass, and a lingering spectral sweetness that she couldn't place. It was the ghost of a garden. They stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind them, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. They were in the main blending hall. Sunlight, thick with dancing dust motes, streamed in from a massive arched window high above, illuminating a scene frozen in time. Giant copper vats, big enough for a person to stand in, lined the walls, their surfaces dulled to a soft, verdigris green. Intricate networks of glass pipes and brass gauges snaked across the ceiling and down the walls, connecting the vats in a silent, motionless circuit. Workbenches of dark, heavy wood were littered with glass beakers, graduated cylinders, and delicate stirring rods, all coated in a fine gray film. It was a laboratory for giants, an alchemist's workshop abandoned mid-experiment. As Elara's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she felt a strange sensation, a flicker of something, a memory that wasn't hers. It was a feeling more than an image, the warmth of steam on her face, the precise weight of a glass stopper in her palm, the quiet satisfaction of seeing a clear liquid turn a deep, impossible blue. It was so vivid, so real, that she physically shook her head to clear it. It was the power of suggestion, the atmosphere of the place. That had to be it. Leo let go of her hand and drifted away, his small fingers tracing the cool surface of a copper vat. He was an explorer in a lost world. "What did they make here, Mom?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly. "Perfume," she said, the word feeling inadequate to describe the scale of the operation around them. They mixed flowers and oils to make sense. She walked over to a workbench, her fingers brushing against a stack of thick, leather-bound ledgers. She opened one. The pages were filled with elegant, looping cursive. The ink faded from black to a soft brown. They were formula books. Ingredients were listed with the precision of a scientific paper. Bulgarian rose otto 12 drops, orris root tincture 4 drams, ambergris 2% solution, but beside the measurements were more poetic notes. "This is the scent of a letter arriving at dawn," or "the feeling of a secret told in a cathedral," and one name appeared again and again in the margins, a signature of sorts, Ethel. Elara felt a connection to the unseen woman, a thread of understanding pulling taut across the decades. This wasn't just a business for her. It was an obsession. It was art. "Mom, look," Leo called out from the far end of the hall. He was standing in front of a smaller, unassuming door, its wood darker than the rest, with a small brass plaque that was too tarnished to read. "It's locked." Elara walked over, the iron key from Mr. Finch still clutched in her hand. The key ring held not just the large, ornate gate key, but a second, smaller, more delicate one. It looked like it might fit. As she approached the door, the strange, unidentifiable sweet scent grew stronger, seeming to emanate from the wood itself. It was a captivating smell, both floral and something else, something mineral, like wet stones after a summer rain. It was a scent that made her feel hopeful, a ridiculous emotion to feel in a place of such decay. She slid the smaller key into the lock. It was a perfect fit, with a soft, well-oiled click that was a stark contrast to the groaning gate. The lock turned. The air in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Elara paused, her hand on the cool brass knob, a sense of profound significance settling over her. This was not just another room. This was the heart of the place. She could feel it. She looked down at Leo, who was watching her with an expression of rapt attention. She took a deep breath, the dusty, floral air filling her lungs, and she turned the knob. The door swung open into darkness, and the scent, the beautiful, mysterious scent, rushed out to greet them like a long-lost friend. It was the smell of truth. The office was a time capsule, a pocket of the world sealed away from the relentless march of the years. The air that flowed out was cool and pure, carrying the complex scent that had drawn them to the door, a fragrance that was now so potent it felt like a living presence in the room. It was a scent of impossible things, of night-blooming flowers and rain on hot metal, of old paper and crystallized honey. It was a scent that didn't just enter the nose, but seemed to sink directly into the memory. Elara stepped inside, Leo close behind her, and flicked a tarnished brass switch on the wall. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a faint hum, a single bare bulb suspended from the high ceiling flickered to life, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. It was small and perfectly preserved beneath its uniform layer of fine, gray dust. A heavy mahogany desk stood against the far wall, its surface clear save for a few specific, intentionally placed objects. Behind it, a tall, worn leather chair seemed to wait for its owner to return. One wall was covered, floor to ceiling, with exquisitely detailed botanical charts, illustrations of flowers, roots, and leaves so lifelike they seemed ready to be plucked from the paper. Another wall was a grid of small, square drawers, each with a tiny, porcelain label bearing the name of an ingredient: sandalwood, myrrh, vetiver, bergamot. It was the sanctum of a master, a place of intense focus and quiet creation. Elara's gaze was drawn to the desk. In the precise center of the vast, empty surface sat a single object, a crystal perfume bottle. It was small and elegantly fluted, catching the light from the overhead bulb in 1,000 tiny, glittering facets. The bottle was empty, but it was sealed with a heavy, ground glass stopper. Tied around its slender neck with a faded silk ribbon was a small, cream-colored card. Elara's fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. Written on the card in the same elegant script from the ledgers were 5 words. The first ingredient is sacrifice. A chill, unrelated to the cool air of the room, traced a path down her spine. This was a message, a piece of the puzzle left for her to find. Sacrifice. What had her great-aunt sacrificed? Her business? Her life's work? She placed the card back on the desk and continued her survey of the room. In a small, built-in bookshelf beside the desk, she found what she was looking for. A row of leather-bound journals, identical to the ledgers in the main hall, but these were smaller, more personal. She pulled one out. The cover was embossed with a single, stylized "A." She opened it to a random page. The entries were dated, but the ink was as clear as the day it was written. They were not the detached notes of a chemist, but the passionate, almost obsessive musings of an artist. Ethel wrote about scent not as a product, but as a medium. She believed it was possible to capture not just the smell of a rose, but the memory of a rose, the entire emotional experience of seeing it, touching it, receiving it as a gift. She wrote about her frustration with the limitations of her craft, her desire to create a scent that could hold a moment in time, perfectly and forever. And then, the entries grew darker. She wrote about Origen, the company Mr. Finch had mentioned. They weren't just a rival. They were predators. They had learned of her unique methods, her unorthodox ingredients, and they wanted them. They had offered to buy her out, and when she refused, they had tried to steal her formulas through industrial espionage, bribing one of her employees. The legal battle that followed had nearly ruined her, but not financially. It had threatened to corrupt her work, to turn her art into a commodity. It was then that she began to write about something new, a final project born of defiance. She called it her lighthouse. It was to be a scent that could not be copied, could not be sold. A scent that was also a signal, a permanent and undeniable testament to her creation. To protect it, she wrote of designing and building a special chamber, a place of absolute security she called the distillation vault. It was becoming clear to Elara that the inheritance was not the factory, not the land, not the dusty equipment. It was the secret. She was not just an heir. She was a successor. The choice was no longer a simple one between selling and keeping. It was a choice between honoring a legacy of defiance and surrendering it to the very forces that had driven her great-aunt into silence. The weight of it felt immense, a responsibility she had never asked for. Her fingers absently traced the edge of the heavy desk as she processed this. They found a small, almost invisible indentation in the wood. Curious, she pressed it. With a soft click, a shallow, hidden drawer slid open from the side of the desk. It was empty, except for a single, large sheet of rolled parchment. She carefully unrolled it. It was not a letter or a formula. It was a diagram, hand-drawn with breathtaking precision. At first glance, it looked like a celestial map, a star chart of a strange, unfamiliar sky. But as she looked closer, she saw that the constellations were not named for gods or mythical beasts. They were labeled with the names of chemical compounds and botanical essences: jasmine absolute, oak moss, civet tincture. And the lines connecting them were not the abstract lines of astrology, but the clear, technical lines of pipes and valves. It was a map of the factory, and at the center of the intricate web, where a sun or a pole star should be, was a single, heavily circled symbol and a name: the distillation vault. The letter from Origen arrived a week later. It was the opposite of the one she had received from Mr. Finch. Printed on crisp, modern letterhead, its tone a smooth, corporate purr that barely concealed the steel beneath. It was delivered by a courier who required her signature, a small act of formality that made the whole exchange feel more significant, more binding. The letter was from their legal department, a firm with a name so long it took up 3 lines. Sterling, Thorne, Blackwood, and Cole. They expressed their condolences for her loss, a loss she hadn't even known was hers to feel. They spoke of their long and storied history with the Vance Son Perfumery, positioning themselves not as rivals, but as old family friends. And then they made their offer. They wanted to purchase the property. The figure they named was staggering. It was a number with so many zeros that Elara had to count them twice. It was more money than she could have earned in 10 lifetimes. It was enough to buy a house, a real house with a yard for Leo. It was enough to afford the best care for her mother, to erase every debt, to build a future free from the gnawing anxiety of financial insecurity. The money was a siren song, a beautiful logical melody that promised to solve every problem she had. But the letter didn't stop there. It went on to detail, with meticulous care, the significant environmental liabilities associated with the property. It mentioned soil contamination, hazardous chemical storage, and the prohibitive costs of demolition and remediation. They claimed, the only company with the resources and the historical context to handle such a sensitive cleanup. The offer was generous. They insisted, a reflection of their desire to preserve the Vance legacy by responsibly decommissioning the site. It was a threat wrapped in a velvet glove. They were telling her the property was both priceless and worthless, a treasure they wanted and a toxic burden she couldn't possibly handle. Sell to us, the letter whispered, or be crushed under the weight of it all. That night, the apartment felt smaller than ever, the walls closing in. The Origen letter lay on the kitchen table, the number seeming to glow in the dim light. It was a tangible solution, a key to a different life. Her gray-tant's cryptic warnings, the dusty journals, the star chart map. It all felt like a romantic, foolish dream in the face of such practical, life-altering wealth. She was a single mother, not a guardian of some long-lost secret. Her duty was to Leo, to her own mother, not to the ghost of a woman she'd never met. Later, as she was checking on her mother, Evelyn's eyes suddenly focused on her. It was a rare moment of lucidity, a brief parting of the clouds. Evelyn's hand, thin and bird-like, shot out and gripped Elara's arm with surprising strength. Her voice was a low, urgent whisper, a sound from a deep and distant part of her memory. "The garden," she rasped, her eyes wide with a fear that was 50 years old. "The glass garden. They can't have the seeds." Ethel hid the seeds. Elara froze. Her mother had never spoken her great-aunt's name before. She had no idea her mother even knew who Ethel was. "What garden, Mom? What are you talking about?" But the moment was gone. Evelyn's eyes unfocused, her grip slackened, and she retreated back into the quiet fog of her own world. The glass garden. The words echoed in Elara's mind, connecting with the image of the 1,000 glittering beakers and pipes in the factory, with the crystal bottle on the desk. Ethel hid the seeds. It was a piece of the past breaking through into the present, a warning from a mind that held forgotten truths. The temptation of the money began to feel like a poison. It was too easy. It was the path of surrender. Her great-aunt had fought these people, had sacrificed everything to keep her work safe. Her own mother, from the depths of her broken memory, was telling her to protect it. The next morning, Elara called Mr. Finch. She told him about the offer. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I see," he finally said, his voice heavy. "They have not changed. They are patient. Vultures are always patient." "They make it sound like they're doing me a favor," Elara said, twisting the phone cord around her fingers. "They say the place is a toxic hazard." "A lie then, a lie now," Mr. Finch replied, his voice gaining a hard edge. Ethel's methods were revolutionary because they were clean. She used sonic resonance and botanical catalysts, not harsh industrial solvents. "The only thing toxic about that place, Ms. Vance, Is Origen's greed, he paused. Let me offer you a piece of advice, not as a lawyer, but as a man who knew your great-aunt. Origen doesn't buy things. They absorb them. They will take what they want from that factory, erase her name from history, and leave you with nothing but the money. And the money will run out. But the legacy they stole from you? That will be gone forever. His words solidified the resolve that had been forming in her heart since her mother's whispered warning. She looked at the letter on her table, at the number that promised an easy life. She thought of the iron key, the empty crystal bottle, and the map that looked like the night sky. She thought of the scent of hope in that dusty, forgotten place. She knew what she had to do. The prison Mr. Finch had spoken of was not the factory. The prison was the easy choice, the safe path that would forever trap her in the knowledge of what she had given away. She was not going to be an inmate. She would be the warden. The decision to refuse Origen's offer felt like stepping off a cliff into thin air. There was a terrifying, exhilarating moment of freefall, followed by the solid, grounding realization that she had chosen her own path. She sent a short, formal reply through Mr. Finch, politely declining the offer and stating her intention to assess the property herself. The silence that followed was more unnerving than the threats. It was the quiet of a predator gathering itself to strike. Elara knew she didn't have much time. Whatever secret the factory held, she needed to find it before Origen found a way to take it from her. She returned to the factory, but this time it felt different. It was no longer a burden or a curiosity. It was a sanctuary. It was her territory. She brought Leo a large flashlight and the parchment map. The air inside the main hall seemed to welcome her. The faint, spectral scent of familiar comfort. "What are we looking for, Mom?" Leo asked, his voice full of a conspiratorial excitement. "We're looking for the heart of this place," she said, unrolling the map on a dusty workbench. The diagram was a beautiful, bewildering puzzle. The constellations of pipes and valves were spread across the factory, from the main blending hall to the cavernous, shadowy floors below. She had to find the starting point. Her eyes scanned the elegant script until she found a small, circled annotation near what looked like the main boiler room in the basement. It was labeled the wellspring that had to be it. The journey down into the factory's lower levels was a descent into another world. The grand, airy spaces of the main floor gave way to a labyrinth of narrow corridors and low-ceilinged rooms. The air grew cooler, thick with the smell of damp earth, cold metal, and lubricating oil. The only sounds were the drip of water somewhere in the darkness and the soft scuff of their own footsteps. The flashlight beam cut a nervous, dancing circle through the oppressive dark, illuminating massive, silent machinery. Pumps, compressors, and furnaces that looked like slumbering iron beasts. Following the map, they navigated the maze of pipes, some as thick as her waist, others as delicate as a finger. They were a circulatory system, an intricate network of arteries and veins that had once pulsed with the lifeblood of the factory. Finally, they found it, a massive cast-iron door with a heavy wheel for a handle. A tarnished brass plate read, "Boiler Room." "The wellspring," Elara whispered. With a concerted effort, she turned the wheel. The door swung open with a deep groan, revealing a cavernous chamber. In the center stood 3 colossal boilers, their riveted sides coated in rust. This was the starting point of the sequence on the map. From here, a central, insulated pipe led out and deep into the foundations of the building. The map showed the first valve, marked with the symbol for alchemical salt, located just beyond the boiler room. They found it, a large, red-painted wheel set into the main pipe. This was the first star in the constellation. "Okay, Leo," Elara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I need you to be my navigator. I'm going to find the valves, and you tell me which one is next." She spread the map on the floor, weighting its corners with loose bricks. Leo knelt beside it, his small finger tracing the path from the first valve. "This one first," he said, his voice serious. "Then we follow the big pipe too." The griffin Elara put her hands on the cold, red wheel. It was stiff with 50 years of disuse. She braced herself and pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a scream of protesting metal, it began to turn. A deep, resonant thump echoed from somewhere deep within the pipe, a sound like a giant heart starting to beat. One down. They moved deeper into the basement, a two-person team on an impossible treasure hunt. Leo, with the unwavering focus of a child at play, would find the next symbol on the map and call it out. Elara, her muscles straining, would find the corresponding valve and force it open or closed according to the diagram's instructions. With each turn, another sound joined the chorus. A low hum from the walls, a hiss of compressed air, a gurgle of liquid moving through long dormant channels. They were waking the factory up. The process was slow, physically exhausting, and mentally draining. The darkness seemed to press in on them, the silence between the groans of the machinery amplifying her own anxieties. What if this was a trap? What if she was releasing something dangerous? But the memory of her mother's words. Ethel hid the seeds, and the cold, corporate threat of origin pushed her forward. This was an act of faith. They reached the final valve, located in a small, cramped access tunnel. The map called it Ouroboros. It was the last star in the sequence. Elara was covered in grime and sweat, her arms aching. "This is it, buddy," she said to Leo, who was huddled by the tunnel entrance, holding the flashlight beam steady. She gripped the final wheel. As she turned it, the symphony of sounds from within the walls reached a crescendo. A deep, powerful vibration ran through the concrete floor beneath her feet. Then, a final, deafening clunk echoed through the entire basement, a sound of immense weight settling into place. It was followed by a profound silence. For a moment, she thought they had failed. Then, from the direction they had come, they heard a new sound. A low, grinding rumble, the sound of stone on stone. They rushed back, their flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the damp walls. They rounded a corner and stopped dead. There, set into a solid wall of bedrock that had been seamlessly integrated into the factory's foundation, was a massive circular door made of polished steel. It had not been there before. It had been perfectly flush with the wall, completely invisible. Now it stood open by a few inches, a sliver of absolute darkness visible within. There was no handle, no lock, no visible mechanism. On its surface, a single line of text was etched into the metal, the letters elegant and clear. "What is given cannot be sold." This was it. The distillation vault. They had followed the map. They had unlocked the secret. Elara placed her hand on the cold steel. It hummed with a faint, residual energy. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of electricity and ancient stone, and pushed. The great door swung inward, silent and impossibly heavy, opening a doorway into the heart of her inheritance. The air that flowed from the open vault was different from any other part of the factory. It was not the dusty, floral air of the upper floors or the damp, metallic air of the basement. It was perfectly still, perfectly clean, and utterly silent. It was the air of a place untouched by time, a pocket of pristine reality. Elara pushed the heavy steel door further, the smooth, silent movement a marvel of forgotten engineering. The opening widened, and the beam of her flashlight pierced the darkness within. The light didn't reveal a room. It was swallowed by it. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of a matte black material that seemed to absorb light, creating a sense of infinite, starless space. She took a hesitant step across the threshold, Leo clinging to the back of her jacket. "It's okay," she murmured, more to reassure herself than him. "We're okay." She swept the flashlight beam across the interior. The darkness gave way to a breathtaking sight. The chamber was circular, and its black walls were lined with thousands upon thousands of tiny, illuminated niches. In each niche sat a small, hand-blown glass vial, no bigger than her thumb. And inside each vial, suspended in what looked like clear, viscous oil, was a single, uncut gemstone. They glowed with their own internal light, a soft, ethereal luminescence that filled the vast chamber with a gentle, multicolored radiance. There were diamonds that pulsed with a cool, white fire, rubies that burned with the deep, steady glow of embers, sapphires that held the deep blue of a twilight sky, and emeralds that shimmered with the green of new spring leaves. It was a library of jewels, a celestial observatory where every star was a perfect, raw gem. The sheer, impossible reality of it stole her breath. This was the glass garden her mother had spoken of. These were the seeds Ethel had hidden. In the precise center of the circular room, on a pedestal of the same light-absorbing black material, stood a single massive crystal. It was the size of a watermelon, perfectly clear and cut with hundreds of precise facets. It was not glowing like the other gems but seemed to drink in the soft light from the walls, its depths holding a swirling, milky nebula of potential energy. It was the heart of this place, the source, the perfumery. The name was a lie, a perfect piece of misdirection. Aethel Vance wasn't a perfumer. Or if she was, her ingredients were not flowers and spices, but carbon and corundum, pressure and time. The complex formulas in her ledgers, the star chart of pipes and valves, it wasn't about mixing scents. It was a process, a recipe for creating this. This was the distillation. She hadn't been distilling the essence of flowers. She had been distilling the essence of the earth itself. The monetary value of the room was astronomical, incomprehensible. It was a number so large it ceased to have any meaning. The offer from Origen was a pittance, an insult. They didn't know. They couldn't have known the true scale of what was hidden here. They thought they were chasing formulas for perfume, not the philosopher's stone. Elara walked slowly along the curved wall, her light playing over the endless rows of glowing vials. She reached out and took one from its niche. The glass was cool and smooth in her hand. Inside, a raw, blue diamond, its edges still sharp and crystalline, pulsed with a soft, steady light. It felt heavy, not just with its own physical weight, but with the weight of the secret it represented. "Mom," Leo whispered, his voice filled with awe. "Are they stars?" "I think they might be, baby," she answered, her own voice trembling. She looked from the gem in her hand to the vast, silent chamber, to the great crystal at its center. The warning from the will echoed in her mind with a new, profound clarity. The scent is a lie. The value is not in the bottle. The empty crystal perfume bottle on Ethel's desk. It wasn't meant to hold perfume. It was a symbol. The real value wasn't in the individual gems, the bottled products of this incredible place. The value was the place itself, the knowledge, the process. This vault was not a treasure chest to be plundered. It was a laboratory, a temple, a testament to a genius that had been hidden from the world for half a century. Her inheritance wasn't wealth. It was a custodianship. Tucked into a small, concealed compartment in the base of the central pedestal, she found it. Another journal. This one was bound not in leather, but in a thin, flexible sheet of metal, its pages made of a durable, synthetic paper. The cover was etched with the same symbol as the central crystal on the pedestal. This was the key, the explanation. She sat on the floor of the silent, glowing vault, Leo curled up beside her, and she began to read. The story that unfolded on those pages was more incredible than anything she could have imagined. Aethel Vance had been a prodigy, a geochemist and a physicist with an artist's soul. The perfumery had been her cover, a legitimate business that funded her true passion. She had discovered that by using specific, complex sonic frequencies, the notes in her perfume formulas, in combination with botanical catalysts, she could create a low-energy resonance field that could influence crystalline structures. She had learned to coax carbon atoms to arrange themselves into flawless diamond lattices, to grow perfect emeralds and rubies from a base solution, atom by atom. The factory wasn't a factory. It was a musical instrument. The pipes were its vocal cords, the vats its resonance chambers. She had played the music of creation. She had sealed it all away not to hoard the wealth, but to protect the knowledge. She wrote of Origen with a cold, clear-eyed fear. She knew that in their hands, her process would not be used for art or beauty. It would be weaponized. They would flood the market with industrial diamonds, collapsing economies and seizing control of manufacturing. They would use the technology to create materials for warfare, for surveillance, for control. They would take her beautiful, miraculous music and turn it into a scream. The legacy was the knowledge. The gems were just the proof. The moral test that had been hovering at the edges of her journey was now standing right in front of her, stark and undeniable. The choice was clear. She could expose the secret, sell the gems, and become one of the wealthiest people on the planet. Her family would be secure for generations. But Aethel's work, her art, her warning would be betrayed. Origin would win. Or she could become the new guardian. She could honor the sacrifice her great-aunt had made and protect this place, this knowledge, from a world that would inevitably corrupt it. It meant walking away from a fortune that could solve every problem she had ever had. It meant a life of secrecy and vigilance, a life of struggle. It meant choosing to remain the warden of a prison that held not a monster, but a miracle. She looked at the glowing diamond in her hand, then at her son, whose face was illuminated by its soft, blue light. The choice was not a choice at all. It was an acceptance. She knew what she had to do. Acceptance did not bring peace. It brought clarity, and with clarity came the chilling understanding of the danger she was now in. The quiet from Origin was not a retreat. It was an escalation. They had made their generous offer, and she had refused. In their world, such a refusal from someone in her position was not a negotiation tactic. It was an irrational act of defiance. It meant she knew something, and they would stop at nothing to find out what that was. The pressure began subtly. A sleek, black town car with tinted windows started parking across the street from her apartment building, staying for hours at a time, its silent presence a constant, unnerving reminder that she was being watched. When she made phone calls, a faint but distinct click would sound on the line just after she connected, the tiny sound of surveillance. They were listening. They were waiting. Elara felt a rising tide of paranoia. The cramped apartment, once her refuge, now felt like a cage, its thin walls offering no protection from the unseen eyes of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. She drew the curtains and spoke in whispers, teaching Leo to play quietly, a new tension settling over their small family. Then came the official assault. A second letter arrived, this one not from Sterling, Thorne, Blackwood & Cole, but from a different, even more aggressive law firm. It was a notice of a lawsuit. Origin was claiming ownership of the core intellectual property of Vance Son Perfumery. They produced a 50-year-old contract, signed by Aethel Vance's estranged business partner, the very man, according to Aethel's journal, who had tried to sell her out. The contract was a flimsy, transparent legal maneuver, but they had the resources to drag it through the courts for years, burying her in legal fees until she was forced to surrender. The lawsuit was a siege engine, designed to starve her out. Simultaneously, a complaint was filed with the city's Department of Environmental Protection. It was an anonymous tip, claiming the Vance Perfumery was leaching hazardous chemicals into the groundwater. An inspector arrived at her apartment, a weary-looking man with a clipboard, informing her that if the site was found to be in violation, she, as the current owner, would be liable for the full cost of the cleanup, a sum that could run into the millions. The toxic lie, the one Mr. Finch had warned her about, was being weaponized against her. She was being attacked on all fronts, legally and regulatorily. They were systematically dismantling her ability to fight back, cornering her like an animal. She felt the walls of her life collapsing, the weight of the factory, the legacy, the secret, threatening to crush her. She knew she couldn't stay in the apartment. It was compromised, unsafe. There was only one place to go. One night, under the cover of darkness, she packed a few bags with their most essential belongings. She bundled her frail mother into the back of her rattling, 10-year-old car and settled a sleepy Leo beside her. She drove across the city, her eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror for the telltale headlights of the black town car. She drove to the factory. Using the iron key, she opened the groaning gates and drove her car into the overgrown courtyard, hiding it behind a thick stand of wild lilac bushes. Inside the factory walls, the silence felt different. It was no longer the silence of abandonment, but the silence of a fortress. This place, which had once seemed like a burden, was now her only shield. She made a small, makeshift camp for her family in Aethel's office. It was the most insulated and secure room in the building. She brought in blankets, a cooler of food, and a battery-powered lamp. For Leo, it was a grand adventure, a sleepover in a secret castle. For her mother, the change of scenery seemed to have a calming effect. She sat in Aethel's old leather chair, her gaze distant but peaceful, as if some part of her recognized the place. For Elara, it was a declaration of war. She was drawing a line in the dust of the factory floor. She was not a victim. She was the guardian of this place, and she would defend it. Mr. Finch did what he could. The old lawyer, galvanized by Origen's aggression, worked tirelessly. He filed countermotions, challenged the validity of the old contract, and argued against the environmental claims. But he was one man, old and frail, against a legion of corporate sharks. He was outgunned, and he knew it. "They are trying to break you, Ms. Vance," he told her during one of their hushed phone calls. "They will use their money and influence to paint you as a negligent eccentric, a squatter on a dangerous property. They will turn the city against you. They will isolate you." His words were bleak, but Elara's resolve only hardened. Living within the factory walls, she felt a strange sense of empowerment. She was no longer just Elara Vance, hospital orderly. She was the successor to Aethel Vance, the keeper of the glass garden. She spent her days exploring the factory, learning its rhythms, its secrets. She spent her nights in the silent, glowing vault, reading Aethel's journals, trying to understand the full scope of what she was protecting. The fight was no longer about money or even about principle. It was about survival. It was about honoring the sacrifice that had been made 50 years ago. She was Aethel's living will, the final ingredient in a formula designed to protect a miracle from the clutches of greed. One afternoon, as she stood at one of the high arched windows in the blending hall, looking out over the wild, overgrown grounds, she saw it. A small, black object rising above the high brick wall at the far end of the property. It hovered for a moment, then moved with a smooth, unnatural precision, its multi-rotored form instantly identifiable. It was a drone. It swept back and forth, a silent, mechanical eye surveying her fortress, its camera lens a cold, unblinking proxy for the vast, unseen power of her enemy. They were watching her every move, mapping her defenses, probing for weaknesses. The siege had begun in earnest. The world outside the gates was now enemy territory. Trapped within the brick and steel fortress of the factory, Elara felt the net tightening. The drone was a constant, unnerving presence. Its faint, high-pitched hum a reminder that Origen's reach extended even into the sky above her sanctuary. The legal battle was a war of attrition she could not win. Hiding was a losing strategy. A fortress, she realized, can just as easily become a tomb. She needed to fight back, but not on their terms. She couldn't outlawyer them. She couldn't outspend them. She had to use the one weapon she possessed that they did not, the legacy itself. She had to use Aethel's knowledge against them, but without revealing the core secret of the gems. To do so would be to lose the war in the act of winning a single battle. Her mind kept returning to a phrase from Aethel's first journal, a project she had mentioned with a mix of hope and desperation. She had called it her lighthouse. Elara had assumed it was just a poetic name for a perfume. But now, reading the journals with new eyes, she understood it was something more. It was a contingency plan, a dead man's switch. She retreated to the vault, the one place she knew she was safe from prying eyes and listening devices. The soft, multicolored glow of the gems was a comfort, a silent chorus of support. She searched Aethel's second, more technical journal, the one bound in metal. And there, in a chapter near the end, she found it. The Lighthouse Protocol. It was not a formula for ascent. It was a process, a set of instructions for the massive, clear crystal on the central pedestal. Aethel described the crystal as a harmonic amplifier and broadcaster, by aligning specific gems from the walls in a precise geometric pattern around the central crystal, and then introducing a specific sonic frequency. She could cause the crystal to emit a powerful, resonant energy wave. The wave was harmless to living things, but it was unique and unmistakable. It would propagate through the Earth's crust, detectable by sensitive seismographs and specialized scientific instruments around the globe. It was a signal. An SOS. Ethel had designed it to be her final, desperate act of communication. In her journals, she spoke of a hidden network of colleagues, independent scientists, academics, artists, and philanthropists who shared her belief that some knowledge belonged to humanity, not to corporations. They were other ships in the dark, she called them. She had shared the frequency signature with them decades ago, a secret pact. The lighthouse signal was a call to arms, a way to tell them that her work was in danger without ever having to speak a word. Activating it was an immense gamble. It would be a flare fired into the night, visible to everyone. It would undoubtedly draw more attention, not all of it friendly. It could expose the factory to the kind of scrutiny that would inevitably uncover its true nature. But it was the only move she had left. It was a choice between the certainty of being crushed by Origin in silence and the uncertain hope of finding allies in the light. She was choosing to trust in her Greytance network, to have faith in the other ships she had never met. The protocol was complex. It required her to select 12 specific gems from the vault: a flawless ruby, a star sapphire, a deep green emerald, and 9 others. The journal specified their exact locations on the walls, their addresses in the Library of Light. Then, she had to place them on the pedestal around the central crystal in a pattern that mirrored the star chart from the desk, the very map that had led her to the vault. It was all connected. The final step was to introduce the trigger frequency using a small, specialized tuning fork she found in a hidden compartment within the pedestal itself. It was a complete, self-contained system. She spent an entire day preparing. She carefully collected the 12 specified gems, their light feeling warm in her hands. She arranged them on the pedestal, their combined glow creating a brilliant corona around the clear central crystal. The pattern they formed was one of exquisite geometric beauty. She took her mother and Leo into the vault with her. She wanted them by her side. She explained to Leo that they were going to turn on a light to call for help. Her mother, sitting quietly, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Her eyes were fixed on the glowing crystal, a look of peaceful recognition on her face. With her family as her witnesses, Elara took the silver tuning fork in her hand. Its tines were etched with complex symbols. She took a deep, steadying breath, the silent, pure air of the vault filling her lungs. She thought of Ethel, of the sacrifice made 50 years ago. She thought of the drone, the lawsuits, the slow, suffocating pressure. This was her answer. This was her act of defiance. She struck the tuning fork against the edge of the pedestal. It did not produce an audible sound. Instead, it released a pure, silent vibration that traveled up her arm and into the very floor beneath her feet. The 12 gems on the pedestal flared with a sudden, intense brilliance. The massive central crystal, which had been clear and passive until now, began to change. The milky nebula within its depths started to spin, faster and faster, coalescing into a single blinding point of white light. A low, resonant hum filled the chamber, a sound that was felt more than heard, a vibration that seemed to originate from the center of the earth. The light from the crystal intensified, bathing the vault in a pulsating, white radiance that was too bright to look at directly. Elara shielded her eyes, holding Leo close. The hum grew into a deep, powerful thrum that vibrated through her bones, through the foundations of the factory, and out into the world. The lighthouse was lit. The signal was sent. She had no idea who, if anyone, would answer the call. She had just turned her secret into a beacon, and all she could do now was wait for the ships to appear on the horizon. The immediate aftermath of the lighthouse activation was a profound, unnerving silence. The deep, resonant hum from the central crystal faded over the course of an hour, the blinding white light within it softening back to a swirling, dormant nebula. The 12 surrounding gems dimmed to their normal, gentle glow. The vault returned to its state of quiet, timeless luminescence. But outside the factory walls, the world had changed. The first sign was the drone. It had been making its slow, methodical passes high above the property, but about 2 hours after the signal went out, it simply stopped. It hovered for a long moment, as if confused, and then turned and flew away with a sudden urgency. It did not return. The next morning, the black town car that had been a fixture across the street from her old apartment was gone. The sense of being watched, a pressure she had grown so accustomed to that it had become a part of her daily existence, lifted. The silence from Origen was no longer the patient, predatory silence of before. It was now a confused, panicked silence. Elara felt it in her bones. She had done something they did not understand, something that was not in their corporate playbook. She had introduced a variable they could not account for, and it had thrown their systematic assault into disarray. For 2 days, nothing else happened. Elara remained within the factory walls, a state of tense anticipation gripping her. Had it worked, or had she simply revealed her position to her enemy for no reason? She tended to her small family, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for Leo, but her ears were constantly strained, listening for any sign, any change. The change came on the 3rd day, not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet, digital trickle. An email appeared in the inbox of the old, barely used account she had given to Mr. Finch. The sender was a Dr. Eris Thorne from the Mauna Kea Observatory in Hawaii. The subject line read, Vance resonant frequency 4,328 Hz. Signal confirmed. Elara's heart pounded as she read the short, cryptic message. Signal received and authenticated. It said, Ethel's children are listening. Stand by. Help is coming, Ethel's children. The phrase sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't literal, she knew. It was a designation, a code for the members of the network. Before she could even fully process the first email, another one arrived. This one was from a foundation for artistic and scientific preservation based in Geneva, Switzerland. Then another from an independent geological research institute in Kyoto, Japan. Within hours, a dozen emails had flooded her inbox, all with similar messages of confirmation and support. They had heard the call. The ships, scattered all over the world, were turning their bows toward her. The true nature of Ethel's genius became clear. She hadn't just built a secret. She had built a community around it, a silent, global network of guardians in waiting. The lighthouse was not just a call for help. It was an activation key for a web of influence and power that Origen had never known existed. The following week was a blur. A renowned international law firm, pro bono, contacted Mr. Finch and took over her case. They filed a massive countersuit against Origen, citing corporate harassment, industrial espionage, and filing frivolous legal claims. The city's Environmental Protection Department abruptly dropped its investigation, citing newly submitted data from an independent source that confirmed the site was, and always had been, environmentally stable. A series of articles began to appear in influential scientific and academic journals, penned by respected figures from around the world. They didn't mention gems or secret technology. They spoke in veiled, academic terms about the Vance legacy, celebrating Aethel Vance as a misunderstood pioneer in the field of sonic chemistry and resonant crystallization, a visionary whose work was being threatened by corporate overreach. They created a narrative, a shield of academic and public support that made Origen's aggressive tactics look like the bullying of a greedy corporation trying to crush a small, independent heir. Origen was forced to back down. Faced with a sudden, inexplicable onslaught of legal, public, and scientific pressure from a dozen different directions, they withdrew their lawsuit and their offer. They retreated into a shocked, wounded silence, utterly defeated by an army they had never seen and could not comprehend. Elara hadn't won a final victory, but she had won the war. She had protected the secret without ever revealing it. She had not become rich, not in the way Origen's money would have made her, but she had become powerful in a way she was only just beginning to understand. She was no longer an isolated victim. She was a vital node in a global network, the keeper of a sacred trust. A month later, she stood in the vault, the air humming with its usual quiet energy. Leo was with her, tracing the patterns on the star chart map, which she had framed and mounted on the wall. Her mother was there too, sitting in a comfortable chair Elara had brought down. Her mother's lucid moments were more frequent now, the peaceful, resonant atmosphere of the vault seeming to calm the storms in her mind. She would look at the glowing gems, a soft smile on her face, and sometimes she would whisper stories about her Aunt Ethel, stories of a brilliant, laughing woman who could make flowers bloom out of season and who believed the world was made of music. Elara finally understood the full meaning of the warning. The scent is a lie. The value is not in the bottle. The value was never the gems. It was the knowledge. It was the purpose. It was the responsibility to protect something beautiful and miraculous from a world that would only seek to exploit it. Her inheritance was not the factory, not the vault, not the fortune in gems. It was the title, the role, the custodianship. She had accepted it fully. "What's this one called?" Leo asked, his small finger resting on one of the symbols on the pipe diagram. "That one?" Elara said, kneeling beside him, her voice soft and sure. "That one is called Legacy. It's the one that keeps the whole system in balance." She looked around the vault, at the quiet, pulsing light of the glass garden, at her son, the next link in the chain, at her mother, the keeper of the memories. She had not found a treasure to be sold. She had found a purpose to be served. The factory was no longer a prison or a burden. It was a home. It was a sanctuary. And she was its warden, its guardian, its future. The lighthouse was dormant for now, but she knew how to light it again if she needed to. She was not alone. There were other ships in the dark, and they were listening.